Good afternoon, everyone. My name is João, and I will be your host for today's session. I'm a board member with IIBA Ireland chapter. Thank you all for coming to our event. We are a new chapter, less than 1 year of existence. So we're very happy and very proud of all of the achievements that we reached. This is our second event. So for us is another milestone reach, another landmark. Apologies. Our event today, the topic is the BA role in Agile projects, and we're very proud of having and honored of having Dr. Michael White. Some of you might know him as the BA doc, but we'll get to that later. We're very honored of having Dr. Michael White as our speaker for today. Allow me to explain the structure of our event. I will start by introducing our speaker. We will then have the presentation by Dr. Michael White, and in the end, we will have some time for a small Q&A session. Besides that, sorry, I would like to explain to you that we have two chat features. So the first one, denominated chat, will be used for generic interaction, any interaction you find relevant. Then we have another feature which is called Q&A, and I will ask you to use that feature for any questions you might have around the content that will be presented today. Just to further explain, please raise your question by writing the question whenever you want or whenever you have that question. But please do note that we will hold answering until the end of the session during the Q&A piece, so that we allow our speaker not to be interrupted and be able to provide all of the to present all of the content he has proposed himself to do. The last note I would like to share with you is around the fact that this session will be recorded, or sorry, is being recorded, and it will be later made available in our YouTube channel. So the IIBA Ireland chapter has indeed a YouTube channel where you can see this video, this event, and past events, and hopefully all the future events we will be hosting. I know there are some questions popping up in the chat. Just allow me to introduce the speaker, because I'm eager to do that, and then let me quickly address the chat before we proceed. So today with us, like I mentioned previously, we have Dr. Michael White. Some of you might know him as the BA doc. Dr. Michael, he has been a business analyst for more than a decade now. He holds a doctorate in business administration, so I've been calling him doctor for a reason. He has earned it. Like I said before, he's the founder of the Business Analysis Doctor LLC, which is by now a global award-winning business analysis training provider. In terms of professional experience, Dr. Michael White has been involved with some of the top financial institutions in the US, and he currently holds, I'm going to try to say this without making a mistake, he currently holds a number of certifications, including the CBOP, the AAC, the CBDA, and the CPOA. Okay, I think I nailed it. Okay, I think we are in a position to start the presentation, if you're comfortable, Dr. Michael. Thank you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Well, first of all, I just want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for joining us. This is actually one of my favorite topics to discuss, typically because a lot of people are interested in it and there's always a lot of engagement. So I hope you all enjoyed the presentation. And again, welcome and thanks for joining us. So we're going to be talking about the BA role in Agile, okay? And one of the reasons why this is such a big topic is because generally in Agile environments, the BA role isn't always highlighted. And so our agenda for today is going to be just some quick basics about Agile. We'll be talking about Agile frameworks, Agile team structures, and then we're going to get down to the details and start talking about the BA placement in Agile, how to define your role in Agile environments, as well as Agile BA responsibilities, and some quick notes on Agile requirements versus waterfall or traditional requirements. Okay. All right. So I just want to start off by saying that Agile as we know it is not actually a methodology. That's actually such a misnomer. Um, Most people say, oh, Agile methodology and waterfall methodology. Those are not actually methodologies because methodologies are a little more sequential and a little more like the steps are required, right? Waterfall and Agile are actually frameworks, right? But in addition to that, Agile is described as a mindset that really guides the way work is done and approached, right? And so it's also referred to as a framework because a framework is kind of like a loose structure that provides fundamentals, and you can add, components of it wherever is appropriate. That's one of the reasons why in many cases, when you go to one organization, Agile looks different. When you go to another organization, Agile looks a little bit different, right? Because the organization is really picking and choosing the components that works best for their organization. All right, and so I'm pretty sure most of you have seen this, but there's always someone who hasn't. So I just add this information about the Agile Manifesto. So for those of you who are not familiar, the Agile Manifesto is where it all started. I definitely recommend if you're not familiar with Agile Manifesto to, go online and research it. But basically it has these principles here of, well, basically it is where Agile started, but it essentially is these principles of what they value, right? And so the things that they value are the things on the left-hand side here. So Agile values individuals and interaction over processes and tools. It also values working software over comprehensive documentation. In addition, Agile also values customer collaboration over contract negotiation, in addition to valuing responding to change over following a plan. Now, the Agile Manifesto also does recognize that there are some value in the things to the right. However, there is a preference or more of a value towards the things on the left. Okay, so that doesn't mean that the things on the right, are out the window. It just means that the things on the left are things that are more highlighted. Okay, and this is just a quick visual of the difference between waterfall and Agile in terms of project flow. So if you're familiar with waterfall, you know that there's generally phases, right? Typical waterfall or traditional project phases include analyze, plan, design, build, test, and deploy. Whereas Agile deals with projects in iterations, right? So for example, you might have all of the components, you might do your analyze, plan, design, build, and testing, and deploying in each iteration, right? And a lot of the times, larger sectors of Agile might be referred to as horizons. So typically you might have like a strategy horizon, an initiative horizon, and then maybe a deliver horizon. But there's a lot of details around that. I didn't really intend on getting into the details of that, just a high level introduction. So if you want to look into that, it's really interesting to research. Okay, and then we have different hybrid approaches. I'm pretty sure that many of you are doing some type of hybrid approach. So a lot of the times what you'll see is when organizations are basically getting introduced to Agile projects, they might start off with, maybe Agile um, development and then have like a predictive rollout. Or the organization might be trying to do a fully Agile project where it's mostly Agile, but there's one specific section of the project that um, has to be done in a predictive. So for example, if you're working with a vendor and there's certain contracts or scheduling around that vendor, that part of the project might be done in predictive approach, whereas everything else is done in Agile. And for those of you who don't know, predictive just means traditional or waterfall. Some of you might be familiar with the term plan-driven. Plan-driven, predictive, and waterfall all mean the same. Agile or adaptive or whatever framework are things that all mean the same. Agile is also referred to as change-driven. And then you might have a situation where the requirements are pretty clear. We know what we want to do. We know what the future state looks like. So we're going to mostly do a predictive project. However, there's a small section of the project that's really complex, or there's a lot of unknown components. So we might execute that little section of the project in more of an Agile environment so that we can, collect information and kind of learn as we go just for that little part. Okay, and as many of you might know, Agile is a framework, and within that framework, there's several sub-frameworks that fall underneath Agile. So many of you might be familiar with Scrum. Scrum is the most common framework that's used in organizations that practice Agile. And that's mostly because of its flexibility and simplicity. Other frameworks might be Extreme Programming or XP, Kanban, Crystal, Scrumban, scaling frameworks such as Scrum of Scrums. SAFe is another. It's becoming more popular, okay, or Enterprise Scrum, and the list kind of goes on. But that's another reason why Scrum can be confusing for those who might not be familiar with it, because you might work at an organization that practices Scrum. So you might think, oh, this is Agile. And then you move over to another organization that practices SAFe, right? So Agile looks a lot different. So now you're confused because you're thinking it's all this one thing, but it's actually because they're using different sub-frameworks of Agile, which all have different, there are some core practices, but there are a lot of differences in between these different frameworks. So I highly recommend that if your organization does use a specific Agile framework, to do some research on the practices, the procedures, and the the different principles of that particular, or ceremonies of that particular Agile framework. In a typical Agile structure, these are the core team structures of the majority of Agile projects, regardless of the framework. Some of these might look a little different depending on your organization, but typically you'll have a servant leader, which might look like a Scrum Master. It might be a team leader or an Agile coach. And then you'll typically have a product owner, which is typically a customer representative. In some cases, you might have the business analyst acting as the product owner, Or you might have the business analyst acting as a product owner proxy, where they are working alongside of the product owner or aiding them, when they're not available. And then you have your dev team. In many cases, this is where the Agile BA will fall. So typically your Agile team, your dev team will consist of developers, testers, architects, QA teams, or any other team that's going to be a part of the build process of your Agile project. And of course, the business analyst would fall within this team as well. And so these arrows here indicate common places where the BA will fit within your Agile team structure. So this is kind of, a little representative of that, where you've got your stakeholder, the business owner or the product owner, and then, the business owner or the sponsor. And then you've kind of got your Agile team here, and then kind of like the supporting subject matter experts that feed information into your core Agile team. All right. Now let's look into some key shifts of the Agile BA. So one of the key shifts is in Agile business analysis, you're going to be doing continuous analysis. So analysis in Agile is, you kind of elicit and analyze information per iteration, but you're constantly learning new information, analyzing information. So the analysis is not like this phase like we saw in the waterfall product life or project life cycle. In Agile, analysis is continuous as new information is learned. And also, the scope is flexible. So a lot of the times, we hear the term scope creep. Now you can still have scope creep in Agile, but it's just that it's less common because the scope of Agile projects are, tend to be a little more flexible, right? So you might start off with the scope, and as you learn information or needs change, then we have to go back and revisit the scope. So Agile frameworks typically leave room for some flexibility around that. So we as VAs need to be prepared for communicating the new scope and being able to work around that. We typically know that Agile is less formal that documentation is less formal in Agile. That doesn't mean that Agile doesn't exist. It just means that documentation is what we call light or done on an as needed basis. And also the timing of requirements. So in Agile, it's usually a good idea not to document requirements too early on. Typically, you might have your user stories that are a little more broad, like they're in epics, and then we start breaking them down into user stories. But as we get closer to the execution of those, we will start, decomposing those and elaborating on those to get them where they need to be in order to go into the next iteration. So timing of requirements in Agile is usually done in the, at the last responsible moment, which means just before we actually need it and not too early on before that. And then in business analysis for Agile environments, the scope of the BA role and responsibilities might be shared or expanded. A lot of Agile environments work in what's called a T-shaped environment that looks like this, which means that you have a deep knowledge in one area. So for us or the BAs, that will be a deep understanding of business analysis, but we have a broad, high-level understanding of things. So we might learn about QA, we might learn about a little bit of lightweight development, we might learn about architecture or things like that, right? So our skill set is expanding, but we still have that deep business analysis knowledge base. So we're still the BA expert, and we might even be training, other team members like the QA team or the developer on some business analysis best practices. Okay. One thing I want to highlight is the fact that in Agile, the BA or the business analyst title might be marginalized. However, the skill set is emphasized. And what that means is, like I mentioned earlier, in a lot of Agile frameworks, the BA role is not highlighted. You might be just lumped into a part of the build or development team, or, you might be this product owner, but you need the business analyst skill set even more, right? Because now you're doing these business analysis activities more often and kind of like almost like at a constant rate throughout the project. So this just goes to say that, some teams think that the BA is not needed, but the BA is definitely needed even more, because we need that BA skill set to be happening on a continuous basis throughout the project. Okay, so while we're all here, where does the business analyst fit into an Agile project? So the placement of business analysts in Agile projects might come in the form of a product owner. So in many cases, in many organizations, the BA might serve as the product owner. There's conflicting, opinions about the efficacy of this, but it largely depends on the organization's structure and needs. Then we have the BA acting as the product owner proxy. This is in environments where the product owner is not fully dedicated to one product or project. So there may also be cases where the product owner is newer, so they don't have the full product owner skill set, which requires some traditional BA skill sets, right? So things like, creating user stories, or, identifying the value of a product, or cost analysis, right? So these are things that are traditionally BA, skill sets. And a lot of the time, a product owner might be someone who has a lot of business knowledge, but they're stepping into the product owner role. So a lot of those project management or business analysis type of skills, they don't have yet. So the business analyst might be paired with them to help supplement, or if they're not available, the BA can step in their absence. And then we have the Agile business analyst. So this is most often used in frameworks where, the team doesn't emphasize or change the roles as much. So things like Kanban or hybrid environments, the structure of the teams don't change as much. So the BA will just use Agile techniques and work closer with the development team, maybe help with testing, and they'll also have like a strong understanding of the Agile development process, right? So they're just getting more involved in maybe the Agile development ceremonies, but they still keep their role, and they're, still kind of like a part of their own BA space, right? And then, like I talked about earlier, the BA may serve as an Agile, as a dev team member. And this is where you have your cross-functional teams, where the Agile team is fully immersed. They form an Agile team at the beginning of the project. And, we really just everybody just kind of learns new things, and it has this cross-functional role. This is really my favorite situation, just because I feel like in these situations, the BA learns more and is more empowered. The team overall is typically more empowered. All right. And I will say we are going to get to these questions. I know we have a lot. I just have a lot of material that I want to get through because I want to make sure I am able to get you all the content that you're here for. But we're definitely going to be answering the questions that are in the chat here. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of these, BA roles individually a little bit more that I just talked about. So now let's look at the business analyst as the product owner. So typically the pros here is that the BA is kind of like a natural fit for the product owner role. So a lot of the times it might be considered a promotion or an expansion of the BA role. Also, the BA will have the needed skill set for the product owner role. And in most cases, the BA works well. This transition works well when the BA is fully transitioned into the product owner role, meaning they're giving full decision responsibilities and things like that. So some considerations is that the BA may not have adequate subject matter expertise for determining business needs. So that might be a transition that the BA has to, it might be a learning curve for the BA. Also, the BA may not be comfortable making project decisions yet. So that is also something that the organization has to, basically affirm the BA that they're the decision maker, and the BA will have to step into that role, that part of the role. Also, some consider BA hybrid to be, ineffective just because, some people feel that they need to be separate roles. But like I said, this is something that really, is dependent on the organization, the structure, the project itself, okay? Then we have the BA acting as the proxy. So some of the pros here is that you have additional coverage for product owner responsibilities, right? The business analyst can support the product owner in weak areas. So like I mentioned, if the product owner is new, they have all of the business knowledge, but they still are lacking those project management skills. The BA can help supplement that, especially in areas like writing user stories, right? And prioritizing, right? The BA can help facilitate that. And also the BA can fill in when the product owner is unavailable. So, a lot of the times product owners might not be completely 100% dedicated to one project. So if a product owner is dedicated to multiple projects while they're away doing something for another project, the BA can step in when that product owner is not available. So some considerations here is that the BA might not be comfortable making product decisions without the product owner if they are stepping away. And also, this could add an additional layer of complexity around authority, right? So, if you have a BA who can make decisions, a product owner who can make decisions, it's kind of like, okay, who's the decision maker here, right? Wonder if, the BA and the product owner have conflicting responsibilities, right? And so another consideration is that the product owner could potentially be held responsible for a decision or an action that's made by the BA, right? So if the BA does something and the product owner doesn't know about it, that product owner still might be ultimately responsible for the consequences of that decision that was made by that BA. And like I mentioned earlier, this could lead to some conflict around prioritization when the BA is absent, if maybe the product owner and the BA have some conflicting opinions or ideas. Okay, so a business analyst as a Agile analyst. So a lot of the pros here is that this can help facilitate the organization's transition into Agile. So what this means is that there's not a lot of disruption. It's just that the BA is often going to be learning more about Agile practices and transitioning how they communicate with the team and how they're documenting requirements, right? So the BA will be learning Agile concepts in a lot smaller chunks. So this is much less disruptive than a full immersion into transitioning into Agile. So some considerations here is that the frameworks generally integrate, framework integration can be challenging. So this is the most common approach in hybrid approaches, right? So when you're integrating Agile with waterfall, sometimes there can be a conflict between the dev team and the project management team, right? So everything needs to be carefully planned out and articulated. Communication does have to be tight here because we need to know what's going on, what to expect, and things like that. And also the dev team may be tempted to leave the BA out of some of the Agile ceremonies. So the business analysts will have to be diligent about making sure that they're aware of these ceremonies and that they let it be known that they want to be included in these ceremonies. Also, sometimes this can actually hinder the BA transition into Agile because, when business analysts or PMO might get too comfortable in that hybrid approach, right? They don't get fully immersed into serving as that role in the dev team. Okay, so sometimes it can kind of, when you get too comfortable with that hybrid role, you don't fully transition into a fully agile team or role, which is ultimately the goal in many cases. And also documentation must be carefully coordinated, right? So this is, again, a place where expectations need to be set. What's the appropriate level of detail? How is timing going to be handled, right? We just always want to make sure that we're acting in the last responsible moment, but not impacting any decisions or not creating any roadblocks for anybody else who might be needing that documentation. And then again, we have the BA acting as a dev team member or a build team member or an agile team member, whatever the organization calls it. Some of the pros here is that the BA roles and skill set can expand. When you're working in a T-shaped environment like this, it increases team task coverage. So if one person isn't available, it's easier for someone to jump right in, right? So there's more coverage and it tends to be more efficient because the team is more empowered, right? We don't have to rely on someone to do something if they're not here. We can just go in and do, assign ourselves to these tasks as long as we know how to do it appropriately. Some of the considerations here is that this only works in cross-functional or T-shaped environments. Team members must be willing to train one another. Also, this requires time for the knowledge transfer, right? Because a lot of these skill sets are very, intricate, right, or detailed. So we do need to make sure that we do allow time for this transition prior to just jumping into this agile team. And the roles need to be clearly understood and defined ahead of time. Oftentimes, this can be determined during the team forming phase of an agile project. All right, so how do we define and understand your role in agile? Okay, two key documents or ceremonies that you might use to formulate that is a team charter, which is not to be confused with a project charter. We'll talk about that in a second. And then also retrospectives is another good way to refine the BA role in agile projects. So with the team charter, essentially what it is a document developed during team formation that establishes the team values, agreements, operating guidelines for the team, right? Usually things that are discussed are the project framework, the business analyst placement in the project, the business analyst responsibilities, the BA deliverables, and what's out of scope for the BA, right? These aren't the only things that are discussed at the team charter, but these are the things that should be discussed in relation to the business analyst role, right? Really, you will be talking about all of these for all of the team members, right? So if your team if your team kind of flounders at the beginning and nobody really knows what to do or how to work with one another, look into having your project team talk to the Agile leader or the Agile coach or team leader about maybe getting a team charter implemented at the beginning of a project. That way you can start setting these expectations earlier on so that when it's time to work, everybody can just, hit the ground running. Okay, and then also retrospectives are a good place to discuss Agile BA roles and responsibilities. So we know that retrospectives typically happen at the end of an iteration. So this would be a good chance for the BA to elicit questions from the other team members, right? In terms of the effectiveness of the BA placement, the effectiveness of the deliverables that the BA had executed or delivered. If there are any responsibilities that need to be adjusted for the BA, or adjustments to the requirements timing, or maybe even adjustments to the knowledge transfer process. So we know in retrospective, we're talking about, what went well, what didn't work well, and things that we want to start doing or how we can make improvements. So in the how we can make improvements and what didn't go well area, this is where we would start kind of asking those questions around, our quote unquote business analyst performance or Agile BA performance. All right, and really quickly, because we just got a couple more minutes, but what are some common BA responsibilities, right? So there's a whole list of these, right? So some of the things that I'll highlight is refining the product vision, right? A lot of the times, the product vision is typically initiated or developed by the product owner or maybe a product manager, but the business analyst can help refine it to make sure that the needs are clearly understood and that the end goal or objectives are clearly understood as well. Also, creating and refining user stories is a very common use of an Agile BA. Also, splitting and decomposing user stories, right? The business analyst is typically the best person to ensure that the user stories are sized or split appropriately so that there's the appropriate level of detail for the developers. Also, refining acceptance criteria, right? Usually the development team relies on this acceptance criteria because to them, this is like their blueprint of the, what they need to code. So they need clear directions on what the outcomes are for this user story or this requirement. Also performing exploratory and functional spikes, right? So if a user story doesn't have enough information to be sized, the business analyst would be a good person to get some additional exploration research. Maybe if we need to do some proof of concept things or something of that nature to help the developer be able to better estimate this requirement or user story. Also facilitating feedback loops and assisting in developing a product roadmap. So in Agile environments, the product roadmap is equivalent to the traditional project plan. The project roadmap is really like going to be the list of the things that we're trying to do for this particular product or project. Also eliciting user stories from stakeholders and product owners, right? So that's typically how we get the user stories documented, is eliciting requirements from them. And then resolving any analysis related roadblocks. A lot of the times the Scrum Master or the Agile coach or team leader is responsible for resolving project related roadblocks, but anything that's related to specifically around analysis, the business analyst can really help resolve that. Okay, and I'm just going to speed it up here because I know we are down to our last 15 minutes. So just really quickly transition about the difference between agile requirements. So at a large scale, agile requirements are informal versus formal. You do a lot more refining versus specifying. There's a lot more discussion versus describing. The timing is different. You usually work in a just-in-time basis versus in phases. You do a lot more prioritization than planning. And then it's a lot more collaborative versus independent. So when you're more formal, we know that agile requirements are typically light. Now, I don't want anybody to think that there's no format, right? User stories and product backlogs do have standards, right? So typically, our user story is in the as a ICANN, so that format, that's what we call the connector format. And there are, standards around that. There's also standards around acceptance criteria, right? The given, when, then format, that's referred to as the Gherkin format. Those are popular standards for user stories. So even though documentation is quote unquote light, there are still standards, and really it is the same amount of documentation. It's just that it's not in Word, right? You might be putting the documentation directly into whatever project management software your organization uses, like Jira or TFS or something of that nature, or maybe Confluence. Okay, so do understand that while project is more informal, documentation is more informal, there are still standards. Again, we do a lot more refinement. So user stories are usually put into a product backlog early on, maybe even in the form of an epic, but then we are constantly refining that, right? So we decompose the epic to a user story, then we decompose the user story down to the acceptance criteria, and then we elaborate right down to the details of the design, so that that might be even where, maybe the development team adds, some tasks so that they know, how they can estimate the story and things like that. Okay. We do a lot more discussion versus describing. So describing means that we're putting it on paper, but a lot of the times we have to have discussion with the development team first, before we fully, elaborate on that. We typically do things on a just-in-time basis. So like I mentioned, just-in-time requirements means that we're doing things right before you need it, or right before the last responsible moment, right? So we don't want to do things too far ahead, because we know in Agile, things change fast and furious. So we don't want to spend too much time changing things, right? That's why we typically do things closer towards the time that it's needed, because we want to have the most up-to-date information. Then again, we know that a product backlog is constantly prioritized. So we don't rely too much on a quote unquote project plan where everything is date driven. We prioritize as new information comes in. The new requirements and needs are constantly evaluated against the currently prioritized requirements, and then we reprioritize based on that. And then collaborative versus independent. So while traditionally business analysts do collaborate quite a bit of the time, when it comes to requirements documentation, though, the documentation process might be a collaborative effort, right? So for example, while traditionally the BA is responsible for developing, creating all of the requirements, in Agile, maybe the product owner initiates the user story, and then the BA might come in and reformat it. And then the BA and the product owner might come in and have some discussion to make sure it looks good. And then the BA and the development team and the PO talk about it, and then they elaborate it some more, right? So it's a much more collaborative process than it has ever been in traditional, environments. All right. And so that is all of the content that I have for you all today. I hope it's valuable to you. I know it went fast at the end, but I hope you got a lot of it, and I hope you're able to apply some of these concepts to your current Agile environment, because it is something that can be a point of contention, especially where the BA doesn't really know their place. And just so you all know, if you happen to be interested in any IIBA certifications, I am a IIBA endorsed training provider. We do ECBA, CCBA, CBAT, AAC, CBDA, as well as we're still bidding out CPOA, but we do have simulation exams for the CPOA for anyone who is interested in that. But we do have full courses, on-demand courses for the AAC as well as live courses. And so our organization, we do offer 4 ways of preparing for exams. So we do have live courses, traditional live that are blended with on-demand and live sessions. We also have fully on-demand courses. We have monthly memberships for people who like to learn in small chunks and want to pay month to month. And then we do also offer self-study training as well. So those of you who are really efficient at studying, you just need the material to kind of make sure you're on the right track, self-study might be an approach for you. So you can find all of those resources at thebadoc.com/courses. And for those of you who do want to reach out to me or communicate with me, or I can be reached on a lot of different social medias: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, Instagram, or you can go to my website at thebadoc.com or email me at info@thebadoc.com. All right, so we've still got a few minutes left for Q&A. Let's see if we can address some of these questions. All right. So I think, Jawo, are you going to narrate the questions to me and we answer it, or do you want me to just
Absolutely, absolutely. I can do it. I have no problem doing that. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Michael. Can I, meanwhile, just ask a quick question? Is it worth it for us to put out a poll to our audience to see in which environments?
Yeah.
Okay, so ladies and gents, I'm going to send out a poll really quickly. Just a straightforward question, just to understand in the audience where everyone is working right now, in which type of environment is everyone working right now. I think it would be interesting to see the output. Sorry. Okay, answers are coming in. Just giving a little bit, a couple of more seconds just to have everyone answering it. Okay, 80% of the people already voted. Just a couple more seconds, sorry. Okay, when I'm going to close it in 5 seconds when it reaches 1 minute. Okay, that's it. Okay, let me share the results.
Okay, do you want me to stop sharing? Let me stop
No,
sharing.
I think, can you see the results on your screen? I think you can. I think you can. Yes, I'm sharing on the screen. So the results are 4% stated waterfall, and 38% stated Agile, and 58%, so the majority stated a hybrid model between something between waterfall and Agile.
Cool. Awesome, awesome,
Okay,
awesome.
so we have four questions for you, Dr. Michael. The first one
Okay.
is why is the BA a part of the dev team?
Yeah, so so in Agile, dev team means something different, right? So it doesn't mean the same thing as like the development team, right? So like we know in traditional environments. So in Agile, a dev team is really like the entire team that's outside of the product owner and the scrum master, right? So it's really like the project team. So typically a dev team would consist of a role that's someone who is doing the development work, also some type of tester, a business analyst, maybe an architect. So some organizations don't even use that term dev team. They might call it a product team, they might call it a build team, or simply an agile team. I think dev team is just, more common to like Scrum. So because it is more cross-functional, they kind of, lose that identity of, development. It becomes more of like everybody involved to get the development of the product executed, but you're not just doing development work. Okay, so don't get too wrapped on the name of the team. It's just really everybody else that's outside of the product owner and the agile, either scrum master or the agile coach or team leader, whatever role that organization has. Okay, I hope that answers that for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Doctor. The next one is from Deepak. Is it easy to become a Scrum Master or a product owner in Agile if the person has a BA background?
Absolutely. I think in general, the product owner role is a little bit more aligned with the BA role than a Scrum Master. A Scrum Master is typically more aligned with like project manager role. The product owner the product owner role and the BA role are really cross functional, right? So I'm just gonna go back actually, if I can pull my screen back up really quickly. And share. For some reason, why isn't it not letting me share? Give me 1 second here. Well, at any rate, the BA role and the product owner role are much more aligned in what they do on a day-to-day basis, right? So oh, let me do this really quickly. I'll share my screen. Just like to have a little visual. So when we go back to this screen here, these are a lot of where the BA role and the product owner role typically overlap anyway. So a lot of the times what the BA really needs to step into the product owner role is really just getting that subject matter expertise of the business and then being allowed by the organization to be responsible for the decisions, right? So yeah, it is quite a natural progression. I don't want to just call it easy, but it is a natural stepping stone for the BA role to transition into the product owner. They could be the Scrum Master too, but the Scrum Master role is not as aligned. The Scrum Master is a little more hands off than a BA typically is. So the product owner will be much more aligned for the BA than the Scrum Master. All right. That's my next question here.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question is from Andre. When and where should the diagrams be documented? Andre mentions that he finds that they're at a high level, that they have a high level detail, but not the low level that is required. So the diagrams are almost always out of alignment or not updated. I'm assuming
Right.
because on an agile methodology, everything changes very quickly.
Okay. So, right. So this is the point where typically when you are doing your refinement sessions and you've got your developers there, that's where you want to have the discussion. Like if they can, if the diagrams are something that they can use, then you will be fine. But if they need more information, then you need to start elaborating on the details of those diagrams so that the developers can be more enabled to understand what's going on, right? So usually during refinement sessions or during elaboration, or maybe even sometimes even estimation sessions, you might find that you need to develop more detailed diagrams that are going to support your user stories. So I would say if your organization has a good practice of refinement, that will be a good time to indicate when you need to start creating those more detailed diagrams, because this should happen right before that user story gets assigned to an iteration. Because once it gets assigned to the iteration, it should be ready to be worked on by the development team. Okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The next one is, and it's not a lot of context here, so if you are able to recall the slide where this was presented, why isn't the BA in a strategy and initiative horizons?
Mm-hmm. The BA is involved in strategy and initiative horizons. It's just that they're working at different levels. So at the strategy horizon, the BA is looking at organizational needs. So the BA needs to have a good understanding of the broad aspect of the organization, what the organization's goals are, things like that. And then at the initiative horizon is where the BA, where the organization has prioritized this project and it has indicated that it's going to be worked on. So at this point, this is where the BA is going to be involved in the product roadmap to really start establishing the goals of this particular initiative and project. So the BA is involved in the strategy and initiative horizon as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Michael. Just to recap, we have 4 outstanding questions. Can we proceed? Can we continue? Is that okay?
I have time, yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next question, in terms of engaging with stakeholders and attending ongoing meetings with both internal and external stakeholders or SMEs, should the BA be part of these meetings, or is it mainly for the PM to attend?
No, the BA should definitely be involved in engaging with stakeholders, right? Both internal and external, because you want to, even if you're not facilitating the discussion, you want to be present. That way you can take notes, you can hear, you can chime in and ask questions, because you always want to make sure that you have that firsthand understanding of what's going on. And if you feel like you are not getting the information you need, then you need to be eliciting the questions or asking the questions you need to make sure that the needs are clear and that you're able to clearly articulate and define those requirements.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, the question is, can a QA move to a BA role?
Absolutely. That is another common stepping stone. So typically you do see a lot of people from the quality assurance teams move into the BA role. The QA teams tends to be a little more around the development side and the code and stuff like that. But yeah, if they're willing to expand their scope and learn more about the business, they can definitely move into the BA role. That is a natural stepping stone as well, and very common.
Perfect. Thank you. The next one is, what are the various and recommended what are the recommended governance structure of the team? Sorry, I'm trying to translate. I'm trying to interpret the best I can this question. What are the various or recommended or a recommended governance structure for a team and to track individual or the team performance?
Yeah. So this can be subjective, right? It really depends on the organization. A lot of the times, in Agile, you look at team velocity and the burn down chart to see how much of the anticipated work they're actually able to do in that iteration, right? And then if they're not meeting the expected velocity or the burn down looks weird, then you start have to investigating why we're not delivering as many stories or completing as many stories as we thought, right? So some things that you can look at from a business analyst perspective is things like effectiveness. Even though in Agile we say we're not as focused on deadlines, we do have unspoken deadlines, right? Like the iteration itself is a deadline, right? So how much are we meeting the deadlines? Are we effectively providing documentation, right? So the question we looked at earlier about having like a high level diagram, but not having the details, that's something that the BA's performance should be judged on, right? Because the BA should be able to gauge whether or not the developer has all of the information he or she needs to properly execute that that user story. So effectiveness of documentation and elicitation activities are some ways that we should assist the developers to gauge kind of like the BA performance. Another thing is, reach out to developers. Do you feel that the BA is providing you the information you need to understand what's going on with this user story, right? So if this was like how I really got, introduced a lot with acceptance criteria, because they're like, I get these user stories and I don't know what to do with them, right? So are we clearly articulating the acceptance criteria so that the developer is able to test and white test their code, right? Are we formulating it to where they can easily say, yes, pass, or no, doesn't pass, right? So how well we're structuring our acceptance criteria. So essentially as a BA, we're judged mostly on how well we are able to document or produce things that other people can use, right? So I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. The questions keep on popping. We now have 8 outstanding. Dr. Michael, maybe you need a glass of water. Okay.
Let's keep going. I think I'm good. While you read that, I will take a swig though.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You have time. The next question is, what are the documents an Agile BAs expect to produce? The artifacts. User stories are not enough, and BAs are not producing any functional documentation. Any functional documentation that Agile. Sorry, I'm having a hard time reading the rest. Sorry. So, what are the documents an Agile BA is expected to produce? User stories are not enough, and BAs are not producing any functional documentation due to the myth that Agile does not need this type of documentation. So this could potentially lead to a gap of knowledge or a gap in terms of artifacts.
Got it. Got it. So what BAs need to understand is that acceptance criteria is functional documentation, right? So when you have the hierarchy of a product backlog, a user story is equivalent to stakeholder requirements, right? What the stakeholder needs to do. Acceptance criteria should be detailed enough so that it's equivalent to functional requirements, right? So that is your functional level of requirements. If the acceptance criteria is not at the functional level to where the developer can build off of it and do light level testing off of it, then the acceptance criteria is not adequate. Okay. So I think that's kind of where I kind of went back earlier where I said that business analysts need to know the standards of user stories and the standards of acceptance criteria. That's why we need to know about the Gherkin format, the given when then, or the if then, or maybe a checklist format, right? So that there's clear indication of what this functionality needs to be. And also, it doesn't always have to be just user stories, right? So there are supplemental documents, like we mentioned earlier, process models, use cases. These are all things that can be added or attached to a user story to add additional context for the developer to build off of. So a lot of the times you are still doing those more traditional techniques. It's just that you are delivering it in a different format. A lot of the times what we do is add it to a user story as an attachment so that the developer can use that documentation to support the build of that story.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next one, is there value in having a project manager and scrum master in agile projects? I can see value in both, but the crossover of responsibilities is very high because of the similar responsibilities.
Yeah, it really depends on the organization, but there could be. Typically, the scrum master and the project managers play around the similar role. Usually the project manager is much more involved, right? So in Agile, a project manager has to become more of a servant leader as well. So they transition more into what the scrum master is. Now, if your organization is doing what you call like the scrum of scrum, where the project manager might just be in charge of managing all these different projects, but they're not getting deep into each of the projects individually. The project manager role might be more of a high level to where they're just kind of keeping tabs on communicating with the executive teams and things like that. Because again, traditional project manager is really date driven and, where are we with these deadlines? So we have to kind of transition and translate that visibility, because leadership still wants those dates and deadlines, but agile practices are kind of like, well, we don't really subscribe to dates, right? So the project manager does have to bridge that gap between giving some form of accountability when it comes to dates and budgets and things like that. So if there are many projects and leadership is having a hard time moving away from that control of dates and budgets and things like that, then yeah, there could be some value in having both.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
The next one is a straightforward question. And can a BA move into a project lead / project manager role?
Yeah, absolutely. If they are willing to, if they're willing to take on more understanding of the IT side of things, they can absolutely be a project lead. In the project manager role, though, they would have to get more comfortable with the whole tactical approach, because BAs are typically more strategic and project managers are more tactical, meaning getting involved in managing everybody's day-to-day work. So, it's just something that they would have to get comfortable with, but yeah, they can absolutely do that.
And Dr. White, if I may add, maybe also start tackling the financial side of things, right? In terms of budgeting etc. It's something.
Yes, absolutely. That's a very good point. Thank you for sure. Yeah, that's a really good point.
The next one, again, similar. I guess there's a lot of people here that are looking to spread their wings to do other things. The next one is the product owner the top of a BA to grow? So is the product owner the top role BA can aim to get?
No, I mean, a BA can actually grow. I've seen BAs grow into chief technology officers, chief information officers, chief strategy officers. So, a BA can really just grow and grow, because a lot of the BA skill set is strategic, right? And a lot of high level, like the C-suite, um, you know, team members, the CIOs and chief financial officers or CEOs, they have strategic thinking because they have to think at the broader level, right? So if you're a BA who's always thinking at the broader level, you can definitely go as high up as you want to, just as long as you're positioning yourself and credentialing yourself, getting the adequate credentials, I should say, and sometimes putting yourself in front of the right people, right? Sometimes, how they say the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? You want to get involved in projects that are high visibility, and do well on that, because you do run the risk of, if you don't perform well, it's highly visible. But if you feel confident that you are performing well, then trying to get on those highly visible projects is a good way to get yourself in the line for, possible promotion to those higher level positions, for sure.
Perfect. Thank you. We're down to our last 4 questions. The next one I will try and break down the best that I can, because it's a big question. Okay, so Dr. White, in your opinion, do you believe that refinement sessions should be only used to explain the feature and the product backlog item to the development team? Because in my organization, we only use refinements to dictate what the development team will do, and only one refinement session is allowed to be run when the features or the product backlog items are written and approved. My understanding is that refinement should be a continuous process for the development team to ensure an alignment and understanding of both sides.
Okay, so it really depends on, again, in Agile, right? It's all about the context, but it really depends on the best needs of the organization and the structure of the team. What I will say is that in general, you have what we call iteration planning. And so iteration planning is where you start planning, what the goal of the iteration is and which stories are going to be allocated to this iteration. And so refinement sessions are typically done in preparation for the planning sessions, right? So when you are planning as an Agile team, you want to have a good set of refined stories so that we know what we're working with before we allocate them to the iteration, right? So it shouldn't just be just like this thing where you're stuck, you can only do one, but it should be done in any situations where you need to have the user story at a certain level of detail to make a good decision, right? So typically, before you estimate the user story, you want to have some refinement, right? So that the developer has enough time to be able to estimate it, or has enough information in order to be able to estimate it. But you also want to refine the stories, so that the team knows which stories need to be added into the next iteration, because typically you want the user stories to be refined and estimated before you allocate them into an iteration or what am I trying to say? A sprint, right? So there might be 2 areas where you can refine, and there could be some refinement taking place during the estimation sessions, right? Because you want to be available there. So if the developer is trying to estimate and feel that they don't need that information, that can almost double as a refinement session there because you start adding more information as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next one, is there a different approach for BAs when working in a non-development team? It can be difficult when you don't have direct influence on tasks outside of your control.
So yeah, this kind of goes back to getting that team charter established, right? So getting it established what the task and what the responsibilities are. And it may involve, even getting with your leadership to kind of talk about, setting these expectations. So is there a different approach in a non-development team? So if you're outside of development team, yeah, that's kind of like where, when I was saying you're an Agile BA outside of development team, you just need to be aware of the Agile practices and be, diligent about letting the development team know that you want to be included in those Agile ceremonies and practices. You might not be the person doing those tasks, but you just want to be included in the conversations or any sessions around that. So the approach is a little bit different in that you might have to kind of work your way into those activities versus if you're in the team, everything is kind of like you can kind of pick and choose. So I would say really getting, if you feel like the development team is resistant to the BA being included, then you might need to work with the Scrum Master or whoever the Agile leader is so that you can get those, that expectation set.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. White. Just a quick note for everyone. I want to thank you all for the input, but we're already 20 minutes past the hour. Right now, I have 4 questions on the Q&A, and those are the 4 questions that I will ask our speaker to answer. I'm sorry, but the doctor has been kindly talking nonstop for almost an hour and a half, and he's been very kind. So this one is on me. I'm saying that from this moment onwards, we will not allow for any more questions because we're already half an hour past the time, and I'm very grateful for all of this interaction. But we also need to respect the doctor's time, and there will be more sessions. I'm sure of that. Thank you for understanding, everyone. Doctor, the next one is pretty straightforward. So can a QA move into a project lead role?
I mean, I think it's possible for any role to move into any role, but typically QA, there might need to be some things in between the QA and the project lead. So you might need to transition from like maybe QA to like the BA first and then project lead. Because that can be considered quite a jump, but if you have the proper skill set and are willing to learn what it takes, anything is possible for sure.
Thank you. Okay, the next one is very generic. Tools that a BA needs to know. Maybe allow me to rephrase this, Dr. White. Can you give us the top 3 tools that a BA in an Agile environment should master?
And I'm wondering if we're talking about tools or techniques. I'm just going to stick with the tools. So generally tools in Agile environments, I would say like applications like Jira, TFS, and Confluence are really ubiquitous and common. In terms of techniques for an Agile BA, you definitely want to have an understanding of user stories and acceptance criteria. You want to have a good understanding of the different prioritization practices. So things like Moscow, ranking, other types of prioritization methods. Also, you want to be really good at modeling, right? So you typically have to have some type of modeling to help support your user stories. So things like process mapping, maybe even in an entity relationship diagram if you're dealing with more of a data-driven project, or something like even data mapping. A lot of the times in Agile, you are doing things that are more data driven, and you're expanding roles. So get more familiar with data mapping, right? Or concept models and things like that. So that's what I would say. Things like modeling, definitely user stories and acceptance criteria standards, prioritization techniques, um, and also, general facilitation, right? General collaboration and um, elicitation strategies. So things like, uh, interviewing, surveys, workshops, right? Things like that. Any type of technique that is going to allow you to better elicit requirements. Also, get more familiar with observation. So when you're in a more collaborative environment, you're also collaborating more with the stakeholders, right? So be willing to sit with them for an hour and learn about their process, right? And take notes and maybe do a process map of that. That gives you great context. So that's what I'll go with.
Thank you. Last two questions, I promise, Doc. The next one is, can you please explain the just-in-time requirements? Sometimes a backlog gets filled up with several months old stories, and story refinement is scheduled much later.
Right. So, and that's exactly it, right? So, with just in time, it really just means that you are not spending too much time refining that user story or that requirement early on, right? Because if you put something in a backlog 2 months and then it's not ready to be worked on until 2 months later, a lot can change, right? So now we're looking at the prioritization of it. And so basically, you just want to make sure that we have the proper documentation during that refinement time, right? So like I mentioned earlier, you assign a project, you assign a story or a requirement to an iteration or a sprint during sprint planning or iteration planning. So that's where you want to have your refinement sessions just before that, right? And so by default, the definition of just in time means that, it's just in time for when it's needed or any decision needs to get made off of it, and not a large amount of time before that, right? So right before we need the information is where we want to have everything ready, right? We don't want to have it, oh, well, this is ready a week ahead of time. No, because things can change, right, in Agile. We want to have it just before it's needed in order to make a decision or needs to be used.
Thank you, Doctor. The last question, can you please explain why is it not a good idea, or it apparently shouldn't be expected from a BA to write all the user stories at the beginning of an Agile project?
Right. I won't say that it's not a good idea to write the user story, because I typically do write all the user stories at the beginning of an Agile project. What I don't do is I don't write the acceptance criteria for the user stories, right? Because you do need something, right? Like they might be in the form of epics, and then you can start doing the user stories, because you are going to need something to prioritize. And then the development team is going to need some type of mechanism to estimate. So the development team needs to do some type of high level estimate so that the team can establish its velocity and things like that. So you might have all of the user stories, but you just don't want to define all the acceptance criteria, because these are the things that can really change and be adjusted as new information is learned. So you just don't want to constantly be reworking or doing rework throughout the project, right? So I would say, whatever stories you can come up with, good. Just don't elaborate on them too much by adding detailed acceptance criteria. maybe even add some high level ones to the stories that we know are at a higher priority, but don't try to get detailed acceptance criteria early on, because chances are things will change and you're constantly getting responses back, right? As you deploy something and seeing how things work, that might change some of the needs or some of the expectations from the user acceptance from the acceptance criteria.
So it's
Okay.
okay to have them drafted as a starting point, as a starting to start the discussions.
Yeah, for sure.
And to evolve from there.
I think
Okay.
that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Doctor, believe it or not, that was the last question. I'm sorry to disappoint you. that
Oh,
was
not a
that
problem.
was the last question we had. I want to thank
I'm
you
happy that
once
everybody
again.
was engaged.
Sorry.
No, I was just saying I was happy that people were engaged and curious.
Yes.
I'm happy to answer.
Yes. Doctor, thank you so much once again for this wonderful session. We want you again. We want you again here. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone. Um, this is not a goodbye and farewell. This is until we meet again. It's been a pleasure. I also want to thank everyone for attending and for sticking with us even half an hour after we were scheduled initially to finish the session. But I think it was a very, very productive session. The last footnote: when the session ends, you will have a survey. You will be prompted to answer a survey. I would please ask you 60 seconds of your time to answer that survey, so that we get feedback from you to understand how the session went and what did you like, what you didn't like, and how can we improve and better serve the BA community. Doctor, any last words from you to the audience?
I just want to thank everybody for coming out and hanging out with us today. I'm happy that people are interested in Agile and the BA role in Agile. I think it's a fun topic to discuss. I'm always willing to, I'm not willing, but I love to connect with you all. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I hope we can engage more.
Brilliant. Doctor, once again, thank you so much for your time. Have a lovely day. Thank you, everyone. See you next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.